obviously the biggest news maybe in a long time is the Supreme Court's decision to overrule or to get rid of Roe v. Wade, the precedent set almost 50 years ago that allowed some form of abortion to be legal, to at least not be criminally punished in this country. And obviously, for many of you out there, you probably already are very much aware that that actual status has not been equal. It's been uneven across the country for a long time, and is only going to become far more unequal now, as something probably like more than half of the country, more than half of the states in the country are basically states where you cannot get an abortion. So this is one of the things that has been brought up in the context of this. There's many conversations. There's many good conversations you should listen to. Ben Burgess did an interview not too long ago with Lillian Securcia. It's a good interview. I think she lays out a lot of the kind of the socialist case for how to deal with this situation and what we need to do about it. But one thing I think that has come up in the context of this is the question of Republican and right-wing overstep. Has the right wing actually gone too far in this? Which obviously, yes, but insofar as like it's horrific for, ordinary people's lives, like this is going to be massively damaging and painful and destructive. Right. And that's among a long list of things that the right has done for kind of the entire history of the right. But the question of right-wing overreach right now has to do with kind of within the cultural zeitgeist of America, of what is acceptable politics. Is this an overreach? And therefore, if it's an overreach, will there be some kind of repercussions or rebound? I think is what's implied when people say overreach.
Yeah. I think I want to quickly say that the thing that kind of got me thinking about this subject, and by the way, I don't know what the answer is, but I want to throw two tweets up here just to look at. I saw a tweet by Ross Barkan, who has been on the show before. He wrote, "We are seeing a right-wing cultural overreach. Average voters want abortion legal and restrictions placed on firearms." He's absolutely right about that. A kind of similar tweet was from Matt Stoller, who writes, "The right has been ascendant in the culture war for the last few years for a variety of reasons, largely because they seemed closer to normies. With guns for all and the creepiness of arresting women who miscarry, that dynamic will change." Again, I think that both of them are right, and they're both sort of expressing a similar kind of sentiment, which is that, the average voter on abortion and gun rights is not close to what the hard fringe of the Republicans are now pushing and what they will probably do post-Roe. Now, that said, that brings up a number of other issues that you kind of alluded to, which is that does it matter, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not just doesn't matter, but like what can be done? Like, will something happen?
Right.
If this is an overreach, then an overreach, again, meaning that there's going to be some kind of response. And obviously there has been. You probably have been to some of the protests that have occurred over the last few days, by the time this comes out, the past week. And I imagine, protests are going to continue as they have before this. And protests matter in some sense. And I think it's important. It's important to think about to what extent they matter. But I do think it matters insofar as it does demonstrate kind of popular support for an issue where we don't have any kind of, large single votes as a country. We don't have referendums on these things. And so in absence of like actual democratic, procedures, we have people showing up and demonstrating. And that in and of itself doesn't bring about change normally. There's been many, many, many protests, and there's only a few that have really actually led to an immediate political shift or political change. But I do think it's significant for kind of calling together political energy and ambitions, and it does provide some focus. But I think it's just anyone who's been to that, one of these protests or any of the other protests, like the many, many protests, whether it has to do with guns or with Trump or with any number of things in the last few years. Socialists have been to many, many more. and because we love to throw a protest.
Yeah.
And the answer is that it doesn't immediately do anything typically, and that's discouraging.
Right, right. And the kind of like larger problem, which again is very discouraging, is something that we talked about when we were talking about guns a few weeks ago, which is that obviously our political system is set up to not only enable, but basically entrench minoritarian rule, which is how the Republicans are able to like skate by or are able to ram through so many unpopular policies. And also the reason why we can't actually enact any of the policies that are popular, such as, say, Medicare for all.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, it just kind of, in some ways, it's a very banal fact, but just the fact that our society is deeply undemocratic at the level of you actually have the ability to express your political opinions, your political interests in any kind of real way, in any, like, concerted way. So, like, if you're in a union, you have that opportunity because you actually have a democratic say within the union. When you vote for a president, like, yes, you have the say to vote for that president. But the actual process by which, like, you got to that, like, we as a country got to the place where there's two people on the ballot in and of itself is a fairly undemocratic and, you know, highly kind of bureaucratic process that's largely determined by rich people and people with power. And that's, for most things, overwhelmingly, the rich and the powerful kind of set the terms, and we don't really have a say. And so
I guess maybe like a follow-up question is, do you think that this could actually change the midterms in any way, which, as we've talked about many times before, has been looking quite bad for the Democrats? Because something that I was thinking about, and I saw a like article in, I think, the Associated Press this morning that basically was like, over 1 million people over the course of this year switched from being Democrats to being Republicans. And I think we've talked about this phenomenon on the show before because, you know, that shift has been happening for a while, or it's been especially pronounced over the last year. And what was interesting about this AP article was that it pointed out that a lot of this activity has been happening in suburban, like, educated areas, right? So these were the people who had kind of in theory, been so disgusted by Trump that they had flipped to Biden. And I think over the last year, we've been seeing them slowly start to peel back over to the Republicans. So, I mean, I guess the question is, like, could this sort of like suburban ring of voters be so disgusted by Republican overreach that they flip back again?
I mean, I want your take on this too, but I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say just because, like, so you take that into account, what you just said, plus, you know, the Supreme Court ruling, and there's like a lot of mishmash of like counteracting, you know, pressures and forces. And, you know, when we think of like the 2020 election where Biden won pretty handily with like, obviously with the electoral college vote, but like a pretty massive popular vote, just tons of people coming out. It was very clear, like, what was at stake in that election, and the choice between kind of which, you know, the current administration or a possible different administration dealing with COVID, and just kind of like the legacy of the Trump years. And I think it's, you know, and there's obviously like there are material aspects to the election, but like those aren't front and center for a lot of that, unfortunately. But so I think like in that case, like, yeah, you do get like this massive kind of like rise of suburbia kind of like pulling the Democrats back into power barely. But I think with abortion, it's tough because like most of the people that it affects are younger people. It's like younger voters, and younger voters don't come out to vote as often. And a lot of that has to do with voter disenfranchisement. That has to do with like it's difficult to get off work. It's difficult to there's just all these barriers that are put in place that make it more difficult for young people to vote. Yeah. And so I mean, you know, predictions kind of worthless, but so I'm kind of skeptical, I guess. Like, there's nothing that immediately says to me that this is going to counteract all of the other things that have been working against Democrats.
Right. I'm inclined to agree with you, and I would also add that, like, the suburban voter is the constituency that Democrats have been, I think, very stupidly chasing for a really long time. And I like it's the demographic that I think Buttigieg famously calls like future former Republicans, right? And I said that in a kind of Trump voice. I don't know why. Anyway,
because it's Buttigieg. Buttigieg
yeah, exactly.
is the Trump legacy.
He's
in
just
the Democratic
like,
Party.
Yeah. I mean, well, on that subject, I was just, when I was reading this, I was thinking about how like the commentariat likes to talk, ad nauseum about the white working class kind of like breaking off from the Democrats or abandoning the Democrats. And it just occurred to me that like it took basically 40 years of the Democrats just like overtly spitting in the face of the white working class for the white working class to be like, I guess we don't vote for Democrats anymore. But the suburban voters that mainstream Democrats are always chasing change their fucking minds every election season, it seems, based on, I don't know, some sort of like weird alchemy of like property taxes plus like their feelings on public schools, like in that very moment, plus like, I don't know, like insert whatever like issue is in the air. So I like, could that ring of suburban, like Republican, Democrat, former, future, whatever, like help Democrats this midterm? Maybe, and I hope they do, but that is not a reliable part of the coalition.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fickle, anxiety-ridden middle-class people. Like, in some ways, it makes sense that that's who you go after every election cycle, because that's probably the easiest person to pick up, as opposed to, like, someone who is completely depoliticized and says,
right.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that's just the, like, for socialists, obviously, like, the overriding issue of our time remains the massive depoliticization of most people. And I know, Jen, you're going to talk about this in a little bit, so stay tuned for that. But just the fact that like we all become kind of resigned to like just the horribleness of life, it's like all the more reason why, and not just life, but like it's not life, it's like capitalism, it's the life we are stuck in right now. That doesn't have to be the life of the future, but this is just like all the more reason why we need to be building solidaristic institutions on the left. That like there's no better time than to try to like build up the power of unions right now. Would love a left party in this country, and hopefully one day we'll get that. But so until then, do the groundwork now if you can. But like for the most part, I think getting people into unions would be useful. And then hopefully like it'll fix all these other horrible, stupid like culture war issues that we're constantly like getting upset over, that like drive us all nuts. That so that's I think the hope. That like, unfortunately, the sober answer, like the faster you get this through your brain, the better you'll feel about living in a miserable fucking country, which is that the hope is the labor movement, and we're not going to get that before the midterms. So probably going to be bad, and you should do what you can to like build a better future by like empowering labor. Sorry, it's what it is.
If you like this video from The Jacobin Show, please hit like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks.